Okay, great. So I'll just start talking and then tell me to shut up when I get to the end of the slides. So I do talk a lot, so hopefully the internet will keep up. Hopefully, so my name is Mark Booth. I work for London Borough of Camden. So we have taken the Kickstart scheme on. We're going to operate as an employer. We're taking 30 roles within the council, and we're enhancing it up to London living wage and offering 36-hour week contracts. So I don't know if you can go to the next slide, please, which just talks a bit about the Kickstart scheme. So I don't know how many of you know about this, but basically the government have announced part of a raft of measures following from the pandemic, basically introduced a scheme called Kickstart, where the government effectively paying for 6-month work placements for 16 to 24-year-olds to do 25-hour working weeks paid at national minimum wage. So that's been rolled out nationally via DWP, so Department of Work and Pensions, and the work coaches who work for DWP are caseloading candidates against this. So people who are within that age group who are considered at risk of long-term unemployment are being put forward for the scheme. So the scheme itself covers the wages, national insurance, and on costs for the participants for that 6-month period. They also come with an additional £1,500, which is used towards the employability and job skills search of those individuals. So it's a work placement, but there's additional in-work support to get people up to a position where they're going to succeed in the labour market. The scheme is now open for placements, and I'll go through the process by which we can apply to this. It'll run until December 21. So that's the last date of placement. So people in theory could still be placed in December of next year and be employed by host organisations until sort of May, June of the following year into 22. So could you go to the next slide, please? So that's just saying, so the council, I think, has kind of taken this on. We understand, youth unemployment in the borough is astronomical. I think there's something like 1,600 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit that weren't on that benefit in April. So we're seeing these numbers increase steadily. So as a council, we've identified this as a key priority for us. So we've got behind it. We've created initial 30 placements to say paid at London living wage. And then we've topped it up from the 25-hour week to 36 hours. And we're hoping to get this up and out the blocks by back end of November, early December. And it sits within part of my service, which is Camden Apprenticeship Team. So we're doing a lot of the administration. If you could go to the next slide, please. So maybe it's just helpful to clarify exactly what the Kickstart scheme is and the conditions for it. So, and it's really important. So these are new roles that are being created specifically. So I think it's critical that the jobs mustn't replace existing or planned vacancies or cause anyone to lose their job or be at risk of redundancy. And I think that's absolutely critical. And DWP are checking to ensure that, participant businesses are following that and that it isn't putting anyone, it's not disadvantaging anyone. Certainly we've had conversations within the authority with our trade unions about this, and that's been one of the considerations. And it's quite a challenge, especially in these uncertain times. So all of the placements must be for a minimum of 25 hours a week, and they must last for 6 months. And the government's offer is national minimum wage. So it's very much like the Future Jobs Fund, for those of you who can remember that scheme. So as a borough, we are encouraging employers to add to that, where they can. So pay London living wage wherever possible, and to offer additional hours if they can. We also appreciate that not all businesses are in the same position, and for some that's just financially not going to be viable. But we would certainly look to see where we can create an uplift enhancement on the government's basic offer. I think it's very hard to live in London on national minimum wage, and I think everyone here would probably agree with that. So the placements themselves must be entry level, so they mustn't require someone to undertake substantial training before they start. So that's kind of critical, that these need to be, easily accessible roles. and understand that the participants are largely going to be coming without a great deal of work experience. They might never work before. So I think it's to have a really clear understanding about where people's starting point is and what their expectations are. So they need to be accessible, and they need to be, you know, fairly entry-level roles, I think is fair to say. I go on and talk a bit about the placements and the training, but every placement has to have employability and basic work skills training. I'll go on to that in more detail. And some organizations will have that on tap. You'll have your internal teams who provide that function, but you'll also maybe want to commission it off the shelf or look at other options. So we're in the process of working through that. It's worth thinking about the phasing of this. So, you know, we've got, we can submit an application at any point once we hit a bundle of 30. But in terms of job starts, some of the roles within your organizations might require a criminal record check, a DBS check, and in which case that needs to be factored into that recruitment timeline. So it's going to take, you know, it depends how long, 4 or 6 weeks, depending on how busy they are to get through that. Next slide. So the training component, and I'm really pleased with the scheme that it's got a reasonable allocation of funding to support people's upskilling and you know, in work progression effectively. So there's a £1,500 allocation per placement. So if you had more than one Kickstarter, you would have multiples of that £1,500 allocation, and that can go towards the setup costs, as well as to support the training. We've looked at it primarily through a sort of training and support lens. It must include the basic work skills training, and then within that, each employer who's creating a Kickstart placement is going to need to demonstrate how they're going to support those participants with their you know, careers advice, guidance, setting goals, you know, their CV, interview prep, basic skills. A lot of this stuff is going to be done in the workplace, so it'll be timekeeping, you know, being part of a team, effective communication. There's a whole suite of different programs and provisions that can meet that spec, but I think you can see there's a fairly broad range of activities that could contribute towards that person's in-work development and progression. Some of that might be stuff that you run as an organization, but like I said, some of it might be stuff that you can buy off the shelf effectively. And I think for individuals, there's also a desire, depending on the candidate that you have, will have different needs. So there's an opportunity to have a more bespoke approach as well, if you've got the capacity and capability to do that. DWP haven't been overly prescriptive beyond what you've seen about what that training provision contains. Could you go to the next slide, please? So as a council, we've been looking at how we respond to this. We've got a training and development service that we use. So they effectively commission trainers to deliver against a number of these competencies. So we're looking at creating a suite of training for our internal candidates, and you know, there's some examples there of different things, and that list is, you know, it could be as long as you want. So we're now in the process of trying to nail that down, and we probably anticipate that functional skills is going to be a considerable challenge for many participants. It's really hard to know who's coming through the door at this stage, but I think there's a number of different areas there we'd look to add to that. We're going to put costs against that and understand, well, what are the financial implications of that. Once we've created a program, the conversations I've had with TDS are, excuse me, that we could make that program accessible to partner businesses who sit within our bid, and that would be entirely optional. So some folks will have the capacity and desire to do this themselves. Other people might think, oh, actually that meets my requirement. We'd be happy to commission you guys to do that. I think the important thing I would say is the council's not in a position, we don't want to make any money out of this, so anything it costs us, it's passed through, so it's all passed through costs, and we have an open book accounting process. And I think we've got the opportunity to work with you guys to define and scope out, you know, additional programs and provisions as and where they're required. So that's at a really early stage, but we're just getting our sort of teeth into that now. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. What is a gateway organisation? So DWP, in their wisdom, have decided that they only consider applications of jobs in bundles of 30. So local authorities, local colleges and employers are also able to operate as a gateway organisation. Gateway organisations effectively bundle jobs into these bunches of 30. They get £300 towards the administration costs for each job placement. So as a council, what we've said is we'll create a bundle of our own, but we'll also support local businesses and organisations who perhaps can't get 30 together on their own, and we'll fold those into a bid. DWP then effectively, we submit an application to DWP, setting out what the jobs are with job descriptions and a basic understanding of the training that's going to be involved. They then take that away and review it and come back to us and tell us what the outcome is. For those of you who've worked with councils before, it's effectively an accountable body function. So the funding ultimately gets paid to the council. Council then basically do the evidencing and processing of payments to our component parts or the organisations that sit within our scheme. So that's what a gateway organisation is. For organisations that can do 30 jobs or more, then they can obviously bid off their own bat. And there are a number of gateway organisations out there. Some are probably going to be more useful than others, depending on. I think some organisations are seeing it as an opportunity to generate income. I think from a council's point of view, we're quite happy to support organisations to participate in this scheme. And I would say that the angle from the council is very much focused on local employment. So we want to try and create as many opportunities locally for our residents as we can. So the critical function here is our interaction as a gateway organisation with the local DWP and the work coaches. So there's a close working relationship because we want to put local people preferably in front of local employers where we can. We just think that's a much better fit. It's more sustainable, it's more financially viable for everyone concerned, but it also supports the council's objective about reducing unemployment amongst this age group. Next slide, please. So the recruitment process, application and recruitment process. So like I said, if you go back a bit, we are gathering bundles of 30 vacancies. So we're fairly well on with that now. What we'll do is when we hit 30, we'll submit an application to DWP. They will take between 2 to 4 weeks is what they're saying to review the applications and then issue funding agreements. We haven't seen a funding agreement yet, but we would look to put in place a simple agreement between us as the accountable body or gateway organisation and our component organisations that sit within our bid. So I think it needs to be a fairly light touch, but you know, our ambition is to be out the blocks on this as quickly as we can, really. So what we are asking organisations to do is to complete a pro forma that sets out what the job is. And there's a number of questions in there about the duties, the place of work, the supervision, what training that's going to involve, start dates, whether they need a DBS, all these sorts of things. But importantly, you'll also need to have a job description for each of the roles that you're creating, and that needs to come back. So that goes in when you submit your pro forma if you choose to work with us. DWP basically review the application and then say, yeah, crack on. At that point, we send job descriptions over to DWP, who put them onto their system, and then their job coaches start to caseload candidates who meet the specification for those roles. So that's the function of DWP, is to review the entry requirements for the roles and to make sure that the candidates they put forward meet the specification. And I've been assured by DWP that they're going to limit the referrals between 5 and 8. So you won't be inundated with 150 candidates for a role, because as employers, you certainly don't want that. But what you do want to know is that there's been a kind of a robust sifting process so that candidates that have been put in front of you meet your specification. And from our role as a gateway organisation, we'll be having regular communication with DWP to make sure that they are delivering against the employer's requirements, because, you know, it's absolutely critical. We haven't got loads of time to spend interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people for roles. I think it's really important that we get this right. So there'll be a lot of conversations with DWP about this. So DWP referred a candidate directly to the organisation, the host organisation, who then effectively go through their recruitment process. You can follow your standard recruitment process, or you can bespoke it. So DWP will follow the process that you determine. Once you appoint the candidate, they then go on to a 6-month fixed-term contract with you on a pay-as-you-earn contract basis. HMRC do something clever which identifies them on your payroll within 10 days of them starting, is my understanding. And at that point, they then release the £1,500 and the £300 attachment fee. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Payments thereafter are quarterly in arrears. So at the end of, it's a 6-month placement. So at month 4, you would get a payment. So you will have to effectively fund the salary for 3 months. And at the end of month 6, so month 7 would be the second payment, which would be the final payment for the scheme. So that's just from your perspective to understand that effectively payment for everything apart from the training is going to be quarterly in arrears. DWP are reviewing that. I think they've had a lot of pushback from organisations, so that may change. It may go monthly. We'll have to wait and see. There's still a real gap in terms of knowledge around detail from DWP at the moment. So in terms of next steps, what we're doing is we are working with organisations across the borough and asking them to complete a pro forma along with a job description, setting out what those roles are. We've spoken about how we could support the KQ board and partnership, and we could create a specific cohort primarily for the KQ partners and just put an application in based around that. It's got its own identity and have a cohort, and we can talk about that separately. I mean, our expectation is that as we achieve bundles of 30 jobs, we'll submit these to DWP, and this will be an ongoing thing, and I suspect that we'll submit multiple applications over the lifetime of this funding stream. So, I think as a council, we're keen to see at least 200 roles created across the borough. We're going to do what we can to encourage businesses to, create enhanced conditions, because I think that you just get a much better placement. I think it's important that we are, leading by example, but we're also trying to, create good working conditions for people. So we talked potentially about working with you guys for, looking at getting maybe an initial application to work together towards the back end of October. I think that gives people enough time to think about it, where it sits in their organisation, to start working through the job descriptions. We would then look to submit that application to DWP back end of October, beginning of November. I think based on that, it's realistic to anticipate a January start. I think you might be able to get stuff off the ground this side of Christmas, but it may be challenging for some people, particularly depending on whether they need a DBS and so on. So that's the presentation. There's my details on there. We've created a Kickstart email in Camden. I think happy to now go into any questions and do a Q&A, if that's okay.
It might be useful if I just tag on to that, some of the Knowledge Quarter's thinking, and then we can kind of answer questions. But again, if people could please put questions in chat. I've already seen there's a great one from the Crafts Council, and then we'll take it that way. In terms of what our thinking was, why the Knowledge Quarter wanted to create a cohort to begin with, really our thinking is around the experience of those on placements. We want them to have the best possible experience. Our end goal is high quality opportunities for local residents. It really cuts to the heart of why the Knowledge Quarter was created. So our hope is that partners can work together to synchronize 2 or 3 cohorts. So we have bundles of 30 placement students together who can go through the experience together as a cohort. So they have their support network there, so they're not isolated in sometimes these very small organizations, that they know they have a group of peers that they can speak to from other organizations who have shared experiences. So our hope is that we can work with Camden to provide a suite of training, a generic employability training, alongside some of the kind of individual employer training that some of you might be offering. Of course, the Knowledge Quarter, various partner sizes. Some will be able to offer this training. Others will need to rely on an external provider. We then want to top this up with a program of Knowledge Quarter training, focusing primarily on kind of soft skills and building that softer side of the experience. So as part of our own bid, we are going to hopefully take on a placement ourselves. That placement will be what we're calling a cohort community manager. In practice, what would this mean? This would mean that they will organize a weekly Zoom call between all people in the cohort to chat in the morning over a coffee to kind of share experiences. This means that there'll be opportunities for them to present to each other, that we can work with partners to get workshops, master classes, talks, to really broaden their exposure to the whole breadth and depth of the Knowledge Quarter. And we're also hoping that we could get pro bono support from some of the larger organizations. Some large organizations won't take part in Kickstart because they're very fortunate. They have their own work placement scheme. Our hope is that through those large organizations, we can piggyback on some of the training opportunities they provide for the benefit of those that join some of the smaller Knowledge Quarter organizations on the Kickstart scheme. In terms of our timeline, as Mark said, this is what we proposed. We proposed 19th of October. People need to come back with us with a definite yes. They will take part at least in the first bid or the first submission. And then 23rd of October, they need to come back to us with their work placement job descriptions and placement forms. This is because Mark and mostly Mark, I think, probably with his skill set, needs to vet them and understand that these are kind of high quality placements, that DWP will actually approve them. And then 1st of November is ideally when we want to submit our first bid. So I'm going to stop sharing and let's answer some of the questions because they're coming hot and heavy in the chat. So Mark, the question that Maxine asked is, if we use another gateway organization, will we still be able to access the suite of training London Borough of Camden will be offering, or will that just be available to organizations who bid via you?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think the answer is yes. I'd like to say yes to that. I think it's down to you as an employer who you choose to deliver that. So some of the gateway organizations are being a bit prescriptive about who you choose and the process that you go through for that. My understanding is that we're a bit more relaxed about it. So if you choose to partner with us, then great. If you choose to access the suite of training that we have available, then I think my understanding is that would also be fine. There is a cost to that, but that from our point of view is going to be, you know, at cost. So it would come out of your training allocation. So it's a really good question. I haven't seen a contract from DWP yet, so I'm anticipating what it says, but my understanding is from all the conversations I've had is it's down to you as an employer what you choose to use that £1,500 towards.
Another question from Sam at Senator St. Martin's. Hi, Mark. Is there any guarantee that if you put forward a job, you would get a short list of local Borough of Camden applicants, or would DWP draw from a wider pool?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So that's something that I've been at pains to speak to DWP about. And effectively, we've insisted that if the roles aren't local, we're not interested. Every time I've been referred back to our borough partnership manager, and they confirmed on several occasions that we will be able to select local candidates, and you as an employer will be able to do that as well. So that's part of your selection process. I've even spoken to the borough solicitor who informs me that that's entirely legal. So, you know, my understanding is that DWP are doing that at a local level. So, and we'll be checking to make sure that that's the case. And if that ever deviates, I think you're going to see all of the councils across London having a problem because we all want to do the same thing for our boroughs. So, yes is the short answer. I've been assured that they will be local.
ASQ 4090 has asked a few questions. A few weeks ago, we informed that these would not be employees, so employers are not to pay their payroll. Is this the case, or has this changed? He's also asked, will the employer receive the full 1,500 and 300 per trainee? Will the trainees officially be employees of the host organization? Who pays the employees, the host organization or government? Will the employer have to issue an employment contract per trainee? Can we commit to 25 hours, or will we have to commit to 36 hours per trainee?
Wow, loads of questions. Okay, so my understanding is they are an employee on your payroll on payee contract, and my understanding is that that would be a 6-month fixed term. Again, I haven't seen the guidance from DWP, but I can't imagine it being anything different from that. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the second part of that question. In terms of the payments, so the employee would receive the full £1,500. The £300 goes to the gateway organisation that pays for the admin. So if you can imagine that they're paying your business in arrears for training. So my understanding, the clarity we don't have is around, does the 1,500 quid come to the gateway organisation and then gets passported to the host organisation? I've had a couple of different answers on that. But you're entitled to the full 1,500 as a business. The £300 goes to the gateway organisation to pay for the administration of paying you as component parts of your businesses. So I think I answered a bit about the trainees be officially employees of the host, because I think if they're sitting on your payroll, yes, they're going to be your employee, and I would expect them to follow your normal terms and conditions. Employees. So the government pay the gateway organizations money in arrears. We then pay that to you. That makes sense. So the government won't pay you directly. My understanding is they pay the gateway organization, who then do the administration, because otherwise they would just contract with you individually. And I think what they've said is they're doing it in bundles of 30, so they want that headache placed somewhere else. Will the employer have to issue an employment contract per trainee? Yes, that would be my expectation. And can we commit to 25 hours? Yes, because for some people, 25 hours is going to be much better than 36. So I think I want to be as flexible as we can with this scheme, make it as inclusive as possible, recognizing that there's a whole range of different people out there with different circumstances, some of which are going to want to work part-time because they've got other caring responsibilities or childcare or what have you.
Another question, Mosh from Birkbeck asked, hi Mark, the training aspect sounds interesting around employability. Given I manage a team of career consultants at Birkbeck, would it be worth partnering on the employability aspect of training for Camden and or component organizations? This would obviously have to be capacity dependent, but would love to discuss.
Yeah, let's have that discussion. I'd be really happy to see that. I want to create the best scheme we can and draw on the best talent and resource. So certainly, the stuff we bring together from Camden is, I want to bring together the best of the partners around the table. So let's have that conversation. Be delighted to.
Hannah from the Crick asks, thanks, Mark. We still have limited operational staff in the Crick, likely to remain as such until spring. So candidates will get a much better experience at the start date of March, April. Is the start date flexible?
Yes. Yeah. So we recognize that it's a really difficult time for a lot of people. I fully anticipate starting a load of folks remotely. So we're kind of getting ready for that. My preference would be that everyone's in the office, in the workplace, because I think you get a much better work experience placement and understanding of how services operate by attending a workplace. But we are where we are, so we're going to be flexible about this. So yeah, we're going to aim to start in, I think we'd be looking at quarterly starts, frankly. So we just want to create as many placements as we can. So we'd be happy to work with you now or in the future.
Jonathan from the Local Government Information Unit asks, hi Mark, can the 1,500 be used for the employability training, or does it have to be used for additional training?
I'm not sure what the difference is. So my understanding is it's employability training and or other stuff that meets the needs of that individual in that role. So I think the devil's going to be in the detail of this, but I don't see why. I think we need to look at that, understand what the intention was. If it wasn't employability training, what would that training be?
Selena has asked for the Knowledge Quarter question, Knowledge Quarter cohort. Have you defined your training scheme and a timetable? We would like to build our own. We can support the wider KQ cohort for training too. I think we're looking at using Camden for the generic training, and the Knowledge Quarter would be more soft infrastructure, soft training between those on the placement. Nice talks on a Friday, or getting people on placement to kind of present to each other. But the very kind of the hard skill stuff would, I think, hopefully come from Camden. But we'd look to some of the larger partners, people that do their own placements like Google, Welcome, for pro bono support, using their kind of generic employability teams to provide things like CV checks and workshops to top that up. Another question from Sema, are there terms of agreement between Camden as a gateway and host organizations available to view?
Not at the moment. We haven't seen a contract from DWP. I've asked for it and they tell me it's with their legal department, which made me laugh. But I think once we see a copy of the contract, we would just replicate the conditions within any partner agreement. So I think for me, it's going to be light touch to get it through legal quickly. It's just it'll be a fairly light touch funding agreement. I think you'll all have seen them 1,000 times from local authorities, but until we get a contract from DWP, we can't start to interrogate that. So we don't have it available at the moment. I am asking for it, but I don't know when we might not get it until we've submitted our application.
Sam from Citizen Martin's question from Daniel: in terms of process, we should be applying as the KQ independently or using Camden as a gateway organization along with tapping into the generic training package? So we would use Camden as a gateway organization. I think we looked at applying ourselves, but you would want to draw on Camden's experience of administering similar schemes, and it didn't really make sense. Our role would be to try to coordinate the action between Knowledge Quarter partners, particularly because what we're seeing is that a lot of partners are applying for maybe 1 or 2 placements, and we are thinking that that person might be quite isolated in a very small organization that some Knowledge Quarters are in terms of size. So if we can try to combine the start dates or create a cohort or create this sense of community, I think that would be the best possible experience for those on the placements. Laura asks, building on Mosh's comments, I'm at the University of London and would like to join the communication around careers training. We work across a number of universities in Bloomsbury and beyond, and may be able to support even if we don't join the KQ scheme. So another offer to you, Mark.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'd be really happy to have that conversation. I'm keen to build as good a scheme as we can. So let's draw on the partners' experience. It'd be great.
Patrick asked, hi, you mentioned drawing pro bono support in larger KQ members. Have you brokered anything yet? Council is developing an offer on HR support. Good to be discussed. Links to this. Only in so much as I've contacted a couple of organizations and started a conversation, but nothing more than that. Selena has asked, can an employer give back part of the 1,500 training costs to the employee as a bonus for completing the scheme? Conscious the dropout rate might be high.
Yeah, that's I like the idea of it. I don't know is the answer to that. I think you could do some creative accounting where if I think the £1,500 is primarily used for training as opposed to bonuses. I think if you'd spent that funding, then you would look. Yeah, I think that might be contentious with DWP. I'll be honest with you. I think it's a great idea, but I need to take that away and ask the question. So I'm happy to do that.
Andrew asks, can you double check the payment details of DWP as we've got mixed messages, repayments, and employers will have to create a business case to justify headcount costs. Our apprenticeship manager stated that they will not be employees, so clarity would be helpful. Can you double check the status of the trainees, that they will be either employees or trainees with the DWP? Are there any anticipated recruitment costs?
Okay, so that's a really good question. My understanding is there's a contract between the organisation and the individual, and they're on payroll. So I think it's they are getting national insurance contributions, so they effectively sit on your payroll. So in my mind, they're an employee. I think it's a point to look at. So I need to take that away. Again, DWP are struggling to get some of the detail out. So we've seen a lot of mixed messages and things are changing quite a lot with them. So we will have a look at that. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what the difference ultimately is between a trainee and someone who's an employee. Effectively, they're still sitting on your payroll. So in terms of, are there any anticipated recruitment costs? Not from our side. So I think as a host organisations, you need to determine what your costs are, but there's no expectation that Camden would make any charges to component businesses for the cost of this scheme.
Sam asked, will KQ be open to organizing discussion and determining employment status for trainees? E.g., do we use work agreement as opposed to fixed term employee contracts? I'm not entirely sure in terms of the answer to that question, but we will bring everyone involved ultimately who kind of goes forward with the scheme together to kind of share information and their own experiences. That's quite easy to do. Patrick asks, I read in the guidance that extensive training shouldn't be considered as part of the role. What do you think is meant by extensive?
Thanks for that, Patrick. That's a good question. I don't know. I think what we've thought about are, fairly bite-sized modular approach to training, take it that these are entry-level programs. So I think putting someone through a Prince 2 might be a little bit beyond the scope of this. You know, like a one-day behavioral interview skills, conflict resolution, stress management, time management, effective writing, communication. That's the kind of skills I would expect to see as part of this. It will. I personally think it will depend on the needs of the individual. Until you've taken someone through a bit of a triage and understood what their development needs are, and that's when we then look at what the response would be, and it'll be individual to each person going through the scheme. That would be my preferred approach to this.
Sam asks, a lot of charities in the Knowledge Quarter work with young people. How can the council work to ensure that those people are signposted to, I guess, local job centers so they're available to the scheme, or that they benefit at least from the scheme?
So we have written out to all of our kind of key partners to encourage them to get behind this scheme and to try and create placements wherever they can. So from a kind of organizational mobilization perspective, I think we're in the process of doing that, along with a kind of, you know, comms campaign. I think in terms of getting the candidates involved, I would expect their work coaches to be doing a lot of that. It's challenging for us to get some comms out. We will do that, but primarily focused on businesses and creating the placements, because I would expect DWP to be doing their job, which is to be signposting and directing folks to these opportunities. I think if we can put a range of good opportunities in front of people, I don't think we'll have a problem filling them based on